Hello, guys. Welcome back. And today we are talking about culture, and the topic is culture dying? So let's go to whatever Oxford Dictionary says about culture. So, on the second definition of culture, which is what I'm trying to concentrate on now, is the ideas, custom, and social behavior of a particular people or society. Which means that culture, as they say, is a way of life. So I'm talking about the language, I'm talking about the food we eat, the attires we wear, and certain practices we have that are very specific to a certain group of people. That's mainly one of the main pointers of what a culture is, right? In a certain context. And this topic is about whether culture is dying. And again, I'm coming from a more Ghanaian perspective, or let's say an African perspective of seeing things, right? And we are now in the stage where globalization is mostly on the doorstep of every individual. We are now interconnected. We are more interconnected than ever. We know what's happening in almost every part of the world, and it's inevitable for us to pick certain behaviors and everything from these type of things we see online. And now it's a global village, so we have a lot of import export. We keep on sharing in each other's cultures and everything. So it was bound to happen that things are supposed we either consciously or unconsciously inherit certain traits or certain way of life in that sense, right? So the question is, we know cultures evolved over time, but what we need to ask ourselves is culture eroding? Has there been a cultural erosion in that sense, right? Where we are losing certain things, right? For example, right? UNESCO made a research and it said about 2,500 languages are at risk of even going extinct. And severally even include some Ghanaian languages like the Efutu and Avitam. I don't know what that is. Pardon my ignorance on that. But yeah, it's something that you realize that this is some examples of erosions in that sense, right? I'm a millennial, right? And my generation and the generation after me, I can clearly see the erosion of our culture, our way of life in that sense, be it the way we even dress, the way we communicate, the way we are more, for lack of a better word, globalized, and mostly heavily influenced by the West. We are mostly westernized than anything. You look at how we dress, we look at even the foods we eat. We have a lot of, Western foods in the country. People would rather have that than have the local foods. Even our language is even eroding in that sense. People don't even teach their local languages to their kids. They teach English and other global languages in that sense. And these are things that you can see it's on the rise. It keeps on happening. Where I remember back in the day in school and other things, speaking local languages was actually frowned upon in school, right? Where you go to school, it's like, hey, why are you speaking your local language? They punish you because of that. You're supposed to speak English and other things. You think about, you don't necessarily think about it, because back in the day, all you do is just obey. But now you're just like, why was this the case where people are losing a certain element of their language? I, for instance, I know I've lost a certain element of my culture in that sense. I don't know a lot about my culture or my father's or my mother's culture, because I wasn't necessarily, in as much as I was brought up in a certain way, I wasn't heavily involved in the culture. I know of my culture, but I'm not part of my culture in that sense, if I'm making sense. And I know some people would try and will relate to what I'm saying. So eventually, like, if I'm following a certain trajectory of how I'm being brought up, you can say that my kids will lose a certain part of my culture in that sense. And that's what I'm talking about when I say cultural erosion, where we are gradually losing, let's say, our identity, in terms of our culture and makeup, even our food and other things. I don't even know, like, some people don't even know what their local food is. We have this rejection of our local food. If you look online at other things, people, say bad things about their local food, even our local languages. People tend to associate intelligence with a foreign language. The fact that I may not be able to speak a language or like articulate myself in a certain, let's say, for instance, English. If people are not being able to articulate themselves in the English language, they are deemed as unintelligent, which is a wild concept to me in that sense, right? What does intelligence mean in that? Like is it your way of communicating in a certain language, or the substance of what the person is saying? So let's talk about some of the things that I regard as being socially, culturally, that are culturally eroding. Let's talk about language, right? As I mentioned earlier, we have few languages that are being going extinct, but I'm talking about the languages that are eroding. Some of our local languages. I'm Fanti, for instance, right? And there's a thing where I say, I am Fanti for, yeah, Pembroke for some. So we pardon my butchering of the Fanti language, but it clearly meaning that we Fantis, we like to mix our language with English, And in hindsight, thinking about it, you realize that it's not necessarily normal, where there's a mixture of a certain language with another language. You can see clearly that, even because you can tell, like, our ancestors were speaking proper, Fanti, and it's been eroding over time, where even certain proverbs, certain things we used to say are now lost in time. The Fanti I speak, or the Fanti my generation speak, is not as good as the Fanti my parents and my grandparents were speaking, in that sense, right? And it's gradually going in a certain direction that I don't think we are noticing it. You can talk about other languages as well. Like you can see that there's a certain level of cultural language erosion happening in certain parts of the country, right? And this is as a consequence of globalization. Even in certain communities and other thing. Is it good or bad? We don't know. We'll just find out. This episode is more about the realization of it. Let's talk about traditional rites, right? Some of them are fading. Let's talk about our wedding practices, right? We've now incorporated a lot of white wedding into our marriage system, right? Even talk about puberty rights. You talk about naming rights. People are doing baby showers and everything. It used to be a foreign concept. Now baby showers is now people are doing it as a thing. We have baby showers. We have as I said, wedding rights and other things. Some culturally accepted thing I agree should be abolished and has been abolished, right? In terms of, you go all the way to the north, talking about the trocosi system, if you're familiar with that. And other bad ones, but I'm talking about the ones that used to be a rite of passage, especially remember the Krobo people used to have this one. I'm trying to, the depot, exactly, the depot rites. Is this more of a rite of womanhood in that size, right? So clearly, and these things are becoming less and more unpopular in this current age and current time. Let's come to our music. We used to have palm wine music. We used to have our high life and other things. Now Afrobeat is like now the most dominant music, and Afrobeat is not necessarily a Ghanaian thing, or in that sense, it's mostly an African thing, and it's not even becoming a global thing, where other people are now doing it in other parts of the world. And my point is, if you're following what I'm saying, there's a gradual erosion of our culture that is happening on a very slow but steady pace. It's not stopping, and it's going on and on. And I hope we find a place where we don't lose ourselves and we don't lose our identity in this current globalization. And also, one problem I have when it comes to culture is especially there are a certain group of people who are out there especially mostly foreigners who have this, or privileged people, for lack of a better word, right? Who have this perception of what our culture is. And they go to certain poor places, right? And they say that I was in the cultural part of of the country. And I find that very problematic. Culture is not synonymous to poverty. You get me? The fact that you go to slums doesn't mean you went to the cultural part of the country. It means that you went to a poor place. That's what it means. It has nothing to do with the fact that you were connecting with the people culturally. It's very insulting to the culture, to the people, or to the way of life of the people. People are there not because they are in their whole, culturally imbued world. They are there because they are poor. So please learn the differences between poverty and culture. Those two are mutually exclusive. They are not in the same category. You understand? So that's also one thing I realized is also heavily propagating the cultural erosion, where what is deemed as culture is being misinterpreted in that sense, especially on the global scale. So people don't even know. There are instances where people come and they go and say that they are now the kings and queens of Ghana. I was like, do you know how many chiefs and kings we have in this country? And they just gave you a ceremonial title and you went out there ignorantly. And I say that with all due disrespect, if I'm trying to be very controversial in that sense. I think it's unexcusable to be ignorant at this point in time, where you can equally do your research and ask people and be humble about your fact finding and be very truthful about certain things, rather than preaching misinformation about people's way of life. And these things are happening across Africa and others in certain places of the world. And I think it's high time we thought about this and see whether we can be able to, especially my generation and up, to be able to uphold certain part of our culture. So I think we should be proud of our way of life, and we making it better doesn't mean we should make it die or we should erode it. It means we are improving on our culture, not necessarily importing other people's culture into our culture, which again, I said, it's a consequence of globalization. But yeah, this is also another ramble of mine, and I felt I should share with people. So please let me know what you think about this. And yeah, thank you for your time.